the next day we were actually on our way out of town. But in that evening, when the earthquake happened, we went over to Kennedy Park, which is in the artsy center of Lima, called Miraflores. And we were walking through the park, which was holding its straw market regardless of earthquake, which was kind of funny. But a woman with a dog was coming along, and I don't speak Spanish, but I wanted to know if the dog had had any indication of the earthquake coming. And so I started a conversation with her, which at first annoyed her because she didn't speak English. But then she got the gist of my question, and a flood of words came pouring forward. And obviously, the dog did know. So that was a curious thing. Anyway, we then had our flight into our next stop at 3:30 in the morning. So we were not able to communicate for a week with anybody back in the States, and they didn't know how we were, which was troublesome, but that was the way the situation was. We were heading into Iquitos. Now, there's Miraflores, that's Kennedy Park, where we had spent the evening wandering around. And here comes Iquitos. Take a look at the top, and you'll see a fairly large-sized city. And I point this out because it's very hard to get there. Iquitos is the only city in the world of its size that you cannot drive to. You have to fly or come in by boat. It is the capital of the jungle of the district of Loreto in Peru. It's in the north. They have had some strong European influx in the 19th century, as witnessed this church. There's an old iron building on the right there, a modern building below it. And on the bottom left, you'll see a lot of traffic, including the tuk-tuks. This is the Peruvian word for the moto taxis that you may have seen around the world. They're three-wheeled, they're like golf carts. And that was the way we were taken from the airport over to the dock. I wanted to also just show you that here, the street scene on the right side, second from the bottom, shows you what the streets and the buildings are like. They were really two-story wooden buildings. They looked like they could blow away in a fierce wind. So it was an interesting city. From Iquitos, of course, we were heading down the Amazon. And there's the street scene, by the way, and they have a big market there in Iquitos. But then we were on our way. So this is a typical riverboat that traverses the Amazon. It took us about 2 hours to get to our destination. We were going to be visiting 3 different camps, all owned by a man from Wisconsin. And the first 2 were in primitive style. And so moving along, this is what we came to. This was the first of our camping sites. And there were lots of steps. Everything seemed to be on pillars and stilts in this region. We had a very unusual welcoming to this. And I'll show you who was there. His name was Charlie. There he is. This is a capybara, and they are the world's largest rodent. They are about 2 feet tall, maybe 4 feet long. They can weigh up to 200 pounds. They're highly social. They hang out typically in groups of 10 to 20. But this fellow was a solo act. His job apparently was to hang out at the dock and greet the passengers who came off the boats. He liked to have his head scratched, so we all scratched and ran. So these were the accommodations that were typical of life in a primitive camp. The mosquito netting was very important. You had screens around. The buildings were on stilts. This one had a dining room, a very large, spacious one. It also had a hammock room. That came to be my favorite room. You could just lie there. There were about 20 hammocks. Just find one and tuck in. They had a bar. They only had 1 generator on the property. That was for the kitchen folk. And if you wanted to use the latrine, you had to go outside in the middle of the night and down the path, which was not very fun because there were snakes around. And in fact, we met while we were at dinner the first night. We heard this pounding coming from the porch door, and it was our guide who was stomping on a coral snake. And they are, of course, a quite venomous snake. So that's why a lot of the buildings in the Amazon are up on stilts because of the snake and wildlife population. So settled in, we went fishing. The next afternoon, we were on the Amazon fishing for pirhana. And we had wooden rods that they handed out and chunks of steak. And so we were out for several hours. We had a bucket full by the time we'd finished, and we came back and handed over the all of the pirhana, and the cook made it up for us for dinner. And I hate to say it, but it tasted like chicken. So we traded in steak chunks for chicken. That's what I say. So the next day, we went into the canopy. This is the Smithsonian research station that they have down there, and they are doing a lot of botanical and wildlife research. This is the canopy, and the canopy is an amazing place. I just couldn't recognize that there were so many trees. They have 40,000 species of trees. And they have a lot of vines, and apparently the vines are what give the rainforests their dense appearance. And they kind of serve as the food highways for a lot of Amazonian wildlife. That was an interesting thing to know. Okay, there were lots of things to do in the Amazon. Another day we went out on the water, and this is what we went after, the pink dolphins. They're like watery ballerinas in pink tutus. And they did a 30-minute show of beautiful, graceful leaps and dives. They knew that they were being watched by us, and they were up for giving us a show. It was really quite fun. Another day, we went to a place called Monkey Island. Now, I have to tell you the story. We were traveling with our daughter who had just finished many, many years of schooling. And this was her trip, her vacation trip from it all. So she is, her name is Caitlin, and she is a person that loves animals and is loved in return. They just have a special affinity for each other. So here we are, stepping off the boat onto Monkey Island, and we troop through this little bit of forest. And as we approach the clearing, the monkeys, who are adolescent monkeys because their parents have been killed by poachers, but now they're being cared for by humans, so they were not afraid of us. They saw us coming and they rushed us. And the monkeys would jump here and there, one into everybody, except for Caitlin. She wound up with 3 of them, one on each shoulder and one on her head. And we were quite amused by all of that. So during the session, my husband remembers that we had one little fellow who every time somebody looked at him, he would start to dance. He would just, he was doing his own thing. And when it was time to leave, I had a monkey who was a bit fractious, and I thought maybe singing him a lullaby would calm him down. So it did, but then it was time to give him back. And when the man approached to take him, the monkey growled at him because he didn't want to stop listening to the music, I guess. So that was fun. All right, moving on. Another day we went to a fishing village. This is the native peoples, and these are some of the huts that you would see. These are rather large ones, but a more diminutive size was the common thing. They're on bamboo stilts. They have 3-sided bamboo, and then the 4th side is left open for the air. The natives here have 2 main occupations. One of them is farming, and the other one is fishing. And they've kind of melded the 2 in recent years to take up fish farming. So that is a big thing for them. They have a cement walkway down the one village that we were at, and we asked why was that, and they said it was because they could better see the snakes at night. Snake bites is apparently one of the big killers of the region. And so the cement walkway and some lights that they had put in were helping the natives stay alive. What a way to live, huh? One thing I wanted to mention about the Amazon, it is an amazing thought. Just think that the Amazon is the mightiest river in the galaxy. That's a mind blower for me. The Amazon is truly one of the gifts of nature to our planet. All right, so traveling along, here is a shaman. He's wearing a typical serape and a beaded cap. This day, we actually met two shamans. They wanted to show us their medicine garden. They had a big herbal garden going on, and then they had an open air tent with benches inside where we went to sit down and listen to them describe what the herbs did in terms of medical cures. And as they were doing their presentation, there was this rustling out in the bush, and an animal appeared, and it was a juvenile anteater. And he came right up to one of the shamans, and with his Pinocchio nose, he brushed the side of the man, and who stood up and went and fetched a bucket and filled it with milk. And the anteater youngster greedily consumed the bucket and asked for more. So that was kind of fun. We had other things to see in the jungle that week. We were taken on a night boating party out to see sloths, and all of us in the boat would just stare into the trees and say, don't see it. But our guide, who actually grew up in the Amazon, was saying, oh, there's one, and there's one. There was a morning visit when we went to a rum shack. Can you imagine morning and rum in the Amazon? That was fun. And we all got samplings. And then, of course, with our guard down, we all had to buy some. There was also a medical unit that we visited. There's a lady from Wisconsin who flies in several times a year and offers free medical services to the natives. It included a dental chair, so I don't know if she practices dentistry too, but it was interesting. Okay, so that was our trip to the Amazon, and we're going to go back now to Lima. This is an amazing site. This is called Santa Rosa, and it goes for miles. And it is one of the large slums in South America. Cardboard became the new concrete here. We visited and saw poverty in the extreme, and it's overwhelming to see it stretch for so many miles. So after that, we were all a bit glum, and our tour guide decided that we needed a little better treatment. So we got a ride along the coastline. Lima is on the Pacific, and it's low-lying. So we were on a bus on this tour, and something very special happened. You'll see there were cliffs there. So the bus had just come to a stop and opened its doors. We didn't know why. And in rushed a monk in his brown robe and cowl, and another one was standing outside the bus. And the monk used sign language to describe that we should all watch him next. So he left the bus, and we all had our eyes pinned on him. And he and the young monk went over to the edge and jumped off the cliff. And they went down, down, down into the water. And then we watched them crawl out of the water, climb up the cliff, and by this time we knew what was going on. They came back dripping wet onto the bus and passed the cowl, and everybody contributed for the show. They had some interesting entrepreneurial ideas for entertainment. After that, we went to lunch. And here is one of my favorite all-time drinks. This is called a Pisco Sour. It's made with a liqueur called Pisco, and several other ingredients. It's topped with egg whites, and it's just delicious. I have been on a search around Northern Virginia for the best Pisco Sour, and I am pleased to announce that the winner is Pio Pio here in Great Falls. They do a great job. Okay, so now going over to some food. These are guinea pigs, and apparently they are like chicken in America. Guinea pig is on the menu a lot. And we were taken to a house where there were a family that wanted to welcome us into their very modest home. And in the living room, the one half of it was given over to about 50 guinea pigs just running around. It was unbelievable. So we learned about guinea pigs, and they will come back shortly in the story. Okay, the next thing, yes. We went to the cathedral in Lima, and we walked through. The cathedral has some very interesting historical associations with the explorers Balboa and Pizarro. The cathedral was founded by Pizarro in 1535, and within a matter of a few years, the Pope had declared it a cathedral basilica. So we're wandering around, and I walked into one room, and here is this piece of art. And this is a very famous piece of art because it's the Last Supper, as you can imagine, except that, I don't know if you can see it clearly, they're having guinea pig in the center. So it is actually called the Cusco Guinea Pig Last Supper. All right, so from here, I'm going to ask Pat to introduce us to two of the famous museums in Lima.
All right. Well, gold is everywhere in Peru because that's where it comes from. Actually, there's a museum of gold, a gold museum. That's the pre-Columbian gold jewelry and ceremonial art. It really is like looking at big diamonds. It's looking at this amount of gold is absolutely stunning, and I thought it was an amazing visit. And we went from this Museo de Oro, from the Museum of Gold. Oh, I have to tell you one more gold story. So I always take some little gifts to give to the children when I go to places where I might see people that don't have a lot of money. So I had taken some costume jewelry, some that was gold colored, and was trying to trade it for some maybe beads like this that the kids or the adults make. And they looked at the jewelry and they took a bite of it with their teeth and said, no, they weren't even interested in costume jewelry because they have real gold. So we went from there to a museum that I didn't know existed, and maybe I was pretty naive, but I was there on a travel agent familiarization trip, and we were taken to the Larco Museum. And the Larco Museum is a wonderful pre-colonial building. Has what the special reason we were taken here was to be a little bit shocked, because the Larco Museum, while it has a lot of pre-Columbian pottery, it has a very big area of erotic art. So there are little clay statues everywhere in all kinds of erotic positions, and we were pretty shocked. But that was our second museum stop in Lima. Go ahead, Eileen. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. That was fun because I didn't get to see those two, and so I'm joining the crowd here, ogling them. So from Lima, our tour then moved to the southeast. We were obviously heading for the land of Machu Picchu and the Inca, and our first stop was the Sacred Valley, the Urubamba Valley. I love to say that word, Urubamba. It's so musical. This picture depicts the gorgeous scenery of that area, and you'll see the Andes in the background there. So Urubamba is about 7,000 feet above sea level. And when you get above sea level to that degree, some people find themselves in need of a little help. Did you want to talk about that, Pat? The coca leaf.
This is when we got off the plane. The coca leaves, yes, that's a lot of farming in coca leaves in Peru. So my introduction was when we flew from Lima at sea level and landed in Cusco at over 11,000 feet. I don't know if you've ever done that. Even flying from here to Denver at 1 mile high city, you can feel it. But landing at 11,000 feet is quite a shock to the system. And I was maybe in my 30s. I don't know. It was a time when I shouldn't have had to be feeling heart palpitations, but we all did. We got off the plane, we're taken to a hotel, and all of our hearts are going really fast. Like, where's the oxygen? Where's the oxygen? Trying to find it because the air is so thin. But our host said, "Don't worry, just come into the dining room here, sit down, and we'll fix you some tea. It's our special coca tea, and it will help you." Well, this is a coca leaf from cocaine, and went into the tea, and we drank it, and they said, "Now we want everyone to go and lie down for an hour and let your heart get used to this atmosphere." So we did, but we had to take an elevator up to our floor, and my feet were not touching the elevator floor. I was kind of floating. Now, I don't know if it was the oxygen or the coca leaf, but we got up to our room, and I flew into the bed gently and lay down, and really felt better when we got up. You really do feel a pressure headache. A lot of people do, a headache that might last for a couple of days. So that the acclimation, if you can do it slowly, is very good. And you think that Cusco is lower than Machu Picchu, but it isn't. When you go to Machu Picchu, you actually go downhill a bit. It's about at 8,000 feet.
Right.
Yeah.
So I met the coca leaf merchant in the Sacred Valley here.
Okay.
We were climbing around and people were starting to show a little distress, and he just pulled out a wad of leaves. It was kind of like chewing mint. And he said, "Here, just chew these." And so we all did. And we didn't have the extreme reaction to them that Pat did. I guess there was something in the tea that worked for you. Anyway, the Urubamba Valley has markets, and I wanted to take you to one. Before we go there, this was a wonderful scene that we encountered as we were walking around the hilltop. This Andean flute player was just standing there and sending out these beautiful plangent tones across the valley below. A special memory. Anyway, here is one of the big markets in the Sacred Valley, and you'll see a lot of textiles in this shot. But they had a lot of food too. And going to Peru, we learned some interesting little factoids. Did you know that Peru is home to the potato? Maybe you did. But did you know that there are 5,000 varieties of potato? They really got into the specifics of agriculture with some of their crops. Of course, they had a lot of quinoa and corn and yucca and avocados. They also have something called chicha, which is a fermented maize drink, and they drink it like beer. So we had a chance to walk around the market on that day as we were heading into the base of operations before we went up to Machu Picchu. There's a town there called Agua Calientes. I call it a plain town with plain fare, but full of expectation. There were some spas there, but otherwise completely unnoticeable. We took the train the next day, and there's the train that is going to take us to the base of Machu Picchu. It was about a 45-minute ride, and during that time, they staged a fashion show on the train, which I thought was not in the spirit of things, but anyway, that's the way they did it. So Here we get to climb up to Machu Picchu. What you're seeing there is a granary, a series of granaries that they had built. Let me talk a little bit about the Inca. You know, it's actually a word that they used only to apply to their leader. He was the Inca, but we have used it to describe their tribe. And they're very interesting and amazing people. They lacked essentials such as the use of wheels for wagons and plows or domestication of animals, so they had to use human labor. They lacked iron and steel and had to build their cities out of stone, again, hauled by men. They lacked writing as we know it. There were no how-to manuals, no to-do lists, no newspapers, no novels, no love letters. They had a genius for monumental agriculture and architecture. The agriculture they carried on in a very difficult environment, as you can see. It's a hillside. And they communed with the stars. They actually defined constellations, both light and dark, meaning that they could identify the constellations where they couldn't see even the stars. And they did it through a mathematical discourse. So they were astrologers ahead of their time, and a genius quality in many of the things they did. So on the drive up the mountain, we saw spacious terraces, which they had created for farming, and these granaries where they could store their produce for months or even years. They had a good system going there. All right, on to Machu Picchu. There is the temple of Inti. He was the sun god. And this is the way it really looks. There's just a lot of ruins and walls built of stone. There's another temple across from this one that had 3 windows that was built so as to catch the sunrise, which was an important feature to the days of the Incas. There was a stone also, an engraved stone that depicted 3 layers of Andean world: the sky spirituality, the everyday existence of earth, and the subsoil of interior life. So they definitely had, they tuned in to their own theology. The next picture describes me. It's not me, but this is what I should have looked like. There I am looking down at all of this gorgeous scenery, but you'll notice there were no borders, no fences. And it inspired in me a little bit of acrophobia. I was afraid to really move, so I sat down and everybody else went up on another walk, and I just decided to sit there and commune with the scenery. I think I wrote some poems while I was there, but it was a wonderful way to spend a few hours. The rest of the group went up to the Sun Gate. And the Sun Gate, that was, historians think that it was the entrance to Machu Picchu, and that it was restricted and guarded by military back then, so that it was only accessible to visitors of the imperial Inca elite. I should have mentioned that Machu Picchu was just the country residence of the Inca emperor. Cusco, which was a little bit away, was actually the Incan center. So many of the ruins here have been yet to be identified. You know, it was abandoned only after a century of use when the Spaniards invaded. And then it got lost in the jungle until 1911 when the explorer Hiram Brigham just rediscovered it by accident. The greatest of the Inca emperors was a man named Pachacuti. Here he is. And he made it one of history's greatest empires. Imagine that, one of the greatest empires in human history. The Inca Empire stretched not only through Peru, but into parts of Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, and Colombia. And I don't know why we don't read about him in the history books. He was quite the guy. So from there, we moved over to a place with a long name called Sacsayhuaman. And Sacsayhuaman is 3 huge walls built of stone. It was an historic fortress made of stone by the tribe called Quilchi. They were predecessors of the Incas back in the 10th century. Some of those stones are 10 feet high. And the Inca, when they took it over, they added labyrinthine passageways and a big central plaza for ceremonial use, capable of holding thousands of people. Here's another look at it with some scope and scale. There are the people and there are the ruins. It's quite an amazing place. We saw a shaman there, and he was sitting on his blanket with his tools, and he looked like he had just stepped out of the Middle Ages. He was great. So the next and final stop is Cusco. And there it is, sitting perched on top of an Andean mountain, an ancient city. It's, as Pat mentioned, over 11,000 feet up in the air. It ranks as one of the tallest cities in the world, rivaling some of the places in the Himalayas. It is full of colorful textiles and oxygen tanks, as she mentioned. I had to find one by the 3rd day. I thought I would be spared, but no, it got to me. The Inca used to divide their city into 4 provinces, and they had a requirement that the local leaders spend a part of their year living in one of the provinces to which they were assigned. The stone walls were amazing. They fit so tightly that you couldn't slip a piece of paper between them. And for a pre-industrial society, and with such perfection, I found that truly amazing. The last thing I will show you here is another textile market, full of color, full of designs. You see the llamas and the alcunas and alpacas and the vicunas on the blanket. A lot of symbology that traveled through the ages with them, and definitely a place to spend your money. So that concludes my visit to Peru, and we're going to open it. And first of all, let me ask if Pat, my co-host, has anything to add about Cusco.
Oh, well, I can bring it up in the chat. Let's get people talking about their stories. When we do that, do you want to raise your hand if you want to be if you want to speak? I don't know if we have too many people to just talk. Let's see.
Well, yeah. So now that we're using the new meeting style format,
Okay.
I think people can just I don't see the.
I'm just talking to the computer.
Oh, okay. I don't see the hand raising feature, but if somebody's got it and they can raise their hand.
Participants.
So first we have to see everybody.
It's under participants.
Okay, thank you.
I see Karen and Gail and.
Well, why don't we just move to? Oh, okay, great. So Natasha raised her hand. This is awesome. Okay, so.
I'm unmuting.
I unmuted everybody.
Oh, okay.
I think we're raised.
Is that okay?
So Natasha, yeah, I think your best course of action is just to. Everybody can now just come over and we can have the conversation and do it that way.
Yeah.
Steve,
Yeah.
it says that the host, has stopped our video. This is Mary Dunbar.
Okay,
Hi,
let me
Mary.
Hi.
unstop your video. And who's sharing their screen?
Hi.
That's Carl and Doris Pearson.
Um,
We still don't have a.
Hold on.
yeah. Let's see, wait a minute. Here, what's this?
So
Start my video. There we go. Wait a minute.
There you go.
Aha. I gotcha.
No,
got me.
I saw this white.
stop. Just there we go. Okay, I was able to figure it out.
Hey,
Okay, and then who
My
wants-
video has been disabled, excuse me.
and what's your name?
Yeah, Aaron.
You're unmuted.
Got it.
Mute.
My video's disabled also, Gail.
All
Okay.
disabled.
Yeah.
Hold on.
There we go.
I'm getting to you.
Yeah. 41.
41.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, yeah.
Miss Teresa, hi.
Hi, very interesting.
Okay.
So who's been
All
to Peru?
Nope.
Anybody?
I have.
Nancy.
37.
have, but I was only 6.
6.
Looked like Nancy wanted to talk. Did you? Nancy Bleeker
Let's see.
just raised her hand.
Well,
Nancy.
so you can see the people that have their hand raised in the corner of their. So
Video on.
Natasha and Karen.
Oh, I see.
I've been there, but I remember so little. I went there when I was 22. I went for a long weekend when I was studying in Colombia.
Ah,
So maybe like 5 days.
Were you in just Lima or somewhere else too?
Cusco and Machu Picchu, that's
Okay.
all.
Okay.
Sandra Taylor has her hand up.
Yes, we went to Machu Picchu, but the first part of your discussion, Eileen, was about the Amazon.
Yes.
And we went in farther down in Brazil. We went into Manaus,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the capital of the rubber trade. They had a big opera house, but we had this experience along on. And one night they took us out on a boat, and we were going to see the caiman, and they were, here are all these alligators, whatever they are, and the boat wasn't even that long. I think that the caiman were as long as the boat, and they said, well, don't worry, they're nocturnal. And so we were glad of that, but my son piped up and he said, why are you chewing on the boat? It's only 8:30. So anyway, yeah, that didn't sound too logical. Anyway.
Yeah. Hey,
But,
Sandra, I don't know if you could see the picture behind me is from an artist who lives in Manaus in Brazil. It's the closest I could come to some artwork about in South America and Peru. But we had an exchange student from Manaus, and his father is a quite well-known painter. So he came with us, lived with us with a wonderful painting under his arm.
Wonderful.
Well,
But-
we stayed at a lodgings. It was called Aria'u, and that horrible film, what was it, Anaconda? I guess they started out there, and so we watched that horrible film just because it had photographed Aria'u. But anyway, there were the monkeys all over, and
Yes.
a lot of things you said were really the same. The big dining room. They took us out piranha fishing, but we couldn't catch any fish. The piranha ate the steak before we could pull them out of the
We
water.
stayed at Aria Jungle Lodge, and we actually
You gotta
swam
just
with
flick
them.
'em in. But we thought if we flicked them in that fast, they'd still be biting and right on our laps. So
Pat, tell them what you did with the piranha.
Oh, we went swimming with them. It was so hot and steamy, and the kids were swimming with them, and they said, well, as long as you don't have any open wounds. Their blood will attract them, and it was so I could go in the water and swam with them and cooled off. It was great.
Well, you see this foliage. I don't know if you did the time of year. Just all of these leaves in the water, and they're saying those are the trees, and the water's come up so high that it's covered them because the river rises so much seasonally and then falls again. And that means that people who live along the river, before long, the water starts rising, and it's up to their ankles and it's up to their knees. Anyway, they go on up to higher ground. But one thing we like to do when people come from other countries is to give them a taste of root beer, because they never had root beer before. And of course, we grew up on drinking it. And they never like it. They always say it tastes like medicine. And the first time I understood that crossover was when they were taking us out on this nature hike, and some of the bark of the trees, they scraped that and you could smell it, and it was that crossover into that menthol, kind of a like mentholatum or something. So then I understood their interpretation. But the place that they held the dining room area was amazing, and the array of fish and fresh fruits and vegetables, and it was really a feast. But the monkeys, it's just screened, and the monkeys are always trying to get in there. And just as somebody was slipping into the dining room, one of the monkeys jumped on their back and got in, and then that monkey went totally crazy. It was going all over, grabbing food right and left as fast as it could. And then all the waiters were running around trying to catch up with it. I mean, it just total havoc there.
Oh my God, it's a great story, Sandra. Thank you.
A lot of good memories.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, speaking of natural wonders, I don't know if you've heard of the book, The River of Doubt.
Yes. Isn't that an amazing story? That's
Amazing
Teddy Roosevelt's story.
The Roosevelt story of his trip down the Amazon, the purpose of which was to find where the River of Doubt and the Amazon intersected. What was interesting is our book group read it. This was some years ago now. The person leading the discussion actually found online footage. Someone actually filmed that whole thing down the Amazon. I mean, it was just, we were more enthralled with that than actually talking about the book, which was fascinating in and of itself. But to see this stuff was incredible. I'm amazed she found it, I think by accident, because she didn't really know what she was doing. She had an iPad and she brought it in, not realizing she needed a Wi-Fi connection. And she thought she could show this thing that she found at home. Of course, not having a Wi-Fi, we had to go somewhere else to see it. But anyway, just the idea that there actually exists something like that, somebody actually filmed it, was amazing.
That's
anyway, you can see all these, the river flowing rapidly. It was just an amazing thing.
And if you haven't read the book or know the story, the highlight of it is that Teddy Roosevelt became deathly sick during that trip, and his son was with him, and he kept vigil one night because everyone expected Teddy to die, and he didn't, and he came back. But an amazing story.
I think the son died then. I can't remember. I thought they had a couple of deaths anyway. I thought the son was one of them. I could be wrong though. It's been a few years ago that I read it.
Yeah.
I read it too, and I was impressed that they started off thinking that they were going to have this luxury tour down this river, and they brought tons and tons of food and spices because Teddy Roosevelt had been president, and they wound up, gradually jettisoning all of it. When they first, when they were trying to navigate all the rapids and things they encountered, and they, they were down to basically shreds by the end of the trip.
Right. Yeah, somebody mentioned the rubber industry, and that was big in the Peruvian jungle too, and it caused a lot of commercial activity, caused a lot of deforestation. And it's ironic because today
the erudition.
No, I can't cook it while this is cooking. It's too hot.
Okay, somebody needs to mute.
Somebody needs to mute.
But today, Iquitos is considered a destination for ecological tourism, so I find that ironic.
Huh?
Oops.
Nancy, in the bottom left, there's a button to touch for mute yourself.
Who is it? I can mute her.
And then,
Okay.
I got
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
May I ask you a question? Did you visit any of the homes of the Peruvians? When we did, they had niches in the walls with skulls of their ancestors.
Ah,
oh, we did, but I didn't, our family didn't have those. They had guinea pigs.
But the other thing about your earthquake is the amazing construction. They didn't have any wheels. And I just have a picture of my Machu Picchu book. You can see the stones. You can't get a knife or a credit card in those stones. And those were put together by humans. And that earthquake, none of them dislodged.
Correct. Yeah, it's truly a phenomenal feat of architecture and engineering that they were able to do that.
Eileen, in the chat, Teresa Rutledge is asking if you could please repeat the name of the book.
The River of Doubt.
Thanks.
Thank
And
you.
also, Norbert Pink asked how the stones were shaped without iron tools.
Well, they had tools to chip away. I don't know what they were called, but they had developed the art of perfection. I mean, to the millimeter, the stones were perfectly laid upon each other. As Carl said, there was no way to put in anything in between the spaces.
And they were huge stones.
Yeah, huge.
Dennis Shevsky had his hand up.
Yeah, they had no wheel. However, there was a toy found. It was a child's toy of a llama sitting on wheels. It never occurred to them that they could use that something like that to transport themselves.
Yeah.
They had that. It's like the Chinese inventing gunpowder and never realized for centuries it could be used for warfare. Well, they had the wheel on twice, but they never used it.
Oh, isn't that interesting? Thanks for sharing that.
Peru was a lot less cerebral than the rest of yours. I was 20 years old and stupid, which is kind of.
Yeah. You know, I mentioned earlier that they didn't have writing the way we know it. And I wondered if somebody was going to ask me about that. What they had to communicate in a physical form were chords. And they would have a series of knots, and they would be different shapes, sizes, knots, different colors. And the combinations that they created would deliver the information. What a difficult way to communicate.
Sandra Taylor has her hand up.
Oh, one area that we went to in Peru that's really fascinating is we went over to Lake Titicaca.
Oh yeah, in Bolivia.
And as you're approaching or near to the area are these islands that are made totally of reeds.
Mm-hmm.
They're floating, and they're, you know, the reeds, they just bind them together and build their houses on there out of reeds, and they have schools, and they just make their everything they need out of these reeds so far as a living structure. So, and Lake Titicaca is really interesting to go to too.
Yeah, that was another offering that our tour offered. We did the jungle one, but not the Titicaca one. So it's nice to have you weigh in on that. Thank you.
We went to Media del Mundo in Ecuador, where they decided where the equator was.
Yes.
And when we got there, they said, you know, you do the photo of striding the equator. And the guide says, that's not really the right place. It's over there by the men's room.
Wonderful, wonderful.
I have an operational question. How do you raise your hand? What do you click on? to raise your hand with the automatically?
I think it's something that is only available to people who are not a host or a co-host.
Okay.
No, it's on the participants button.
Some people
This
are
is
actually
Dory.
raising
If you
their
click
hand.
on participants, there's a blue hand. If you click participants, you can raise your hand.
Yeah, if you click reactions, you can too.
Okay. All right.
See, the guests know more than we do.
Eileen, could you go over again that level, the way they communicated without tools?
Yeah, through a series of knots.
Knots. Okay.
Knots, yeah. Tied in different ways, different sizes and different colors and different materials. And all of that went into creating this elaborate combination system.
How intricate.
Yes, I know.
Whoops.
Well, they didn't have much else to do after they'd finished farming.
And shaping rocks.
That's true. Yeah.
Sounds like it took a long time, whatever it was. The
Indeed.
knots and the carving.
Yeah. And you can see the knots coming forward in all of those textiles. You know, that's probably a consequence of that writing system.
Sure.
Can I say something about Nepal?
Oh, sure.
Your stay in the monastery was wonderful, but I went to Nepal after our son climbed Mount Everest. And flying over the Himalayas was absolutely fantastic. In fact, we had a small plane that came close. You have to be careful because the Chinese border is on the other side. This is just a montage of photos of Everest. Climbed it in 2008. And after we met him in Kathmandu, he and I went to one of the national forests and for 6 days rode on elephant back to photograph tigers and Indian one-horned rhinos.
Oh.
Had a camera, but when you're on the top of an elephant, you really don't get a chance. So I've got plenty of photos of rhinos because they charge the elephants and they stop about 10 feet away, realize the elephant is too big and they run away. The tigers, I've got flashes of orange in grass, so that's about, but we saw tigers too.
You did? Wow. So is it a preserve?
Yeah, there are several forests in Nepal that are preserves. There aren't many tigers left in the wild.
Mm.
Chinese raised them on farms for aphrodisiac purposes. They killed them.
Yeah, sad.
Yeah.
You know,
when we talked about Nepal, we didn't, and your son climbed, and I understand you have to be a very experienced climber. I asked another friend of Eileen's and mine if she'd like to do a program on when they climbed Kathmandu.
Kilimanjaro.
I mean, what does it start?
Kilimanjaro.
Kilimanjaro. I knew it was a K word. They climbed the Kilimanjaro, and she said we could never have climbed the Himalayas. She said it's you really have to be. But yet there were people when we talked about Nepal, that there were people in our group at the monastery who had actually done the first stage, climbed up to base camp. They said.
I think you stay in base camp for about 4 weeks, don't you, before you move on to the next stage?
Well, the trekkers, the goal is to go to base camp, and base camp is 20,000 feet.
Is that right?
And then, Everest is 29,000 feet.
Yeah, yeah.
Our son has climbed 4 of the 7 summits and almost the 5th.
He's one of those people, Carl. Good for him. That's an elite group. So, any other stories about Peru tonight?
I have one.
Yes, Sandra.
I guess at Miraflores, did you notice the parasailing, the planes that were taking people over the cliff?
Oh no, I didn't see that.
Well, that's something my husband and I did. I don't really know why, because we don't know all these people, but anyway, they just attach you and kind of run, and there you go. It's only a 300-foot drop down to the rocks, but anyway, that was a real great adventure.
Yeah, so imagine those two monks diving off of that so low. It's
Like
a long way down.
It certainly was.
Yeah. Oh, and I have a funny story to tell you about coming down from Machu Picchu. Speaking of entrepreneurial endeavors, there was a teenage boy at the top when we got into the bus, and he waved goodbye to us. And the bus, the road down from Machu Picchu is a series of switchbacks. And as we came abreast of the next central spot on the switchback, there was that young teenage boy waving to us again. He had run down the mountain. And when we came around on the next switchback, he was there, and he followed us all the way down the mountain and collected his money.
I haven't been to Peru, but I've been to Bolivia, so I have a story about coca tea.
Yes.
So I was there for when I worked for USAID many years ago, and flying into that airport is at 13,000 feet, the highest commercial airport in the world.
Wow.
And so when we got there, I was with a colleague, and the people who met us from USAID there said, drink the coca tea. My colleague didn't do it. He was sick for days. I drank it, and I was great. I had no problem.
Oh, isn't that good?
But I have to say, I was taking notes as we were sitting there, having the tea and adjusting. And later, when I looked at my notes, I had a few squiggly lines, and then the pen just went off the edge of
cocoa leaves.
Looks like notes been from my 8 a.m. class in college. Hi, Jane.
I had to leave for a minute because
Jane's out in Texas.
My cousin showed up unexpectedly. But I wanted to just jump in for a second to say that I have a wonderful collection of textiles and costumes from Peru and the Andes from my parents. They're quite old. They bought most of them in the mountains in the 1940s, early 1940s. And I'm trying to figure out what to do with them.
Maybe they're museum.
They are, yeah, some of them I think are probably museum quality and interesting.
Have you talked to the Textile Museum in Washington?
Yes, I've been there. And I bought one of their books, and I did talk to somebody, but priorities of trying to figure that out.
Well, you remind me of something. In the group that we traveled with, there was a 14-year-old boy who had been adopted. He was of Andean descent. And when we went shopping in the afternoons, nobody could buy anything because nothing fit. Everything was geared for smaller bodies, except for this young boy. He had found his element. He was just snatching up everything he could find because his body type fit the national type. Yeah.
Yes, they're quite different sizes.
Yeah.
And I've got some two or three costumes, the full costume, the hat, the blouse, the shoe, and all of the things that go with them. And then some wonderful family photos when my mother dressed my brother and me up. And
oh, we want to see them.
Yeah, they're fun.
If you come to the next party, show them to us. We're going to be down near you next time. We're going to a place we had both been before, but we went on a very special behind the scenes trip to Santa Fe.
Oh, great.
Santa Fe.
The great cities of the Southwest.
In a way, there are more things to talk about with our visit to Santa Fe than I think in any trip that we've brought to you so far. Just a wealth of different cultures, different topics, so much history, so much beautiful art. It's going to be wonderful.
We had been there before, but this trip we did together, it was really in depth and behind the scenes. Have a lot of good stories.
There are a lot of connections between Fort Worth and Santa Fe and the museum.
Huh. Like what?
Well, the museum, the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, was heavily involved with Fort Worth people, and a lot of collectors. A lot of people here have second homes or retirement homes there. Santa Fe and Taos. The man who owned this house that I live in was the first man to be able to buy land and have a house in Taos on the rim in Taos. He and his wife had an interesting collection of things from that area.
Yeah, I bet.
Santa Fe.
So do you still have the White Elephant Saloon down there in Fort Worth?
No, we sold it a few years back to a chef named Tim Love, who has a series of restaurants. He has 7 or 8 restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still operating. We still have all the hats on the ceiling.
That's where your friends taught me the Texas two-step.
Oh, right. It's still there. So, well, this was a fun tour. Thank you for
You're very welcome.
taking us around Peru. I remember a little bit, but I was pretty small.
Well, you have a lot of beautiful textiles. I'd like to see them.
So I guess
well, I have them all. I had a fire in my house 4 years ago, and everything had to be moved out. And these costumes and things were in 2 suitcases that belonged to my parents, and they had combination locks, and I didn't have the combination, so they stayed in there forever. But they finally had to come back here, so I have them all in one closet now, and where I can see them and try to figure out what to do with them. So if anybody has any great ideas, I will welcome that.
Oh, her father was my Spanish teacher.
So I'm going to sign off, but thank you all again. It's nice to see some other.
Well, I think it's probably time that we were all heading out. Pat, do you want to make final comments and recognize our sponsor?
Yeah, I just want to thank Andrea Savage again for supporting us. And I thank you all for coming along with us. And we'll see you next week in Santa Fe. And maybe, Jane, we could organize a college reunion on.
Yeah, Jane.
Do that.
Jane, it's Mary Greenawalt Dunbar.
Yes, hi.
And I just want you to say hello to your father.
Was he your Spanish professor too?
Any Spanish that I could remember. He certainly drilled it into my head.
I still have some of his books.
Oh, we used his book.
Oh, I know.
Wonderful.
I went to Oaxaca, Mexico on a photography with a photography group, and a woman in it I had the book with me, and she nearly ripped it out of my hands and took it away from me for the entire 2 weeks I was there. And said, I loved that book.
Oh, was she a DePaul grad?
No, she was from.
Oh, she was just using it for the Spanish.
Hey.
Yeah. Right. Well, it was good. He was one of the best teachers I ever had. Yep. Absolutely.
That's why he speaks so much Spanish.
Yeah, he was the head of the Spanish department.
Yeah.
You know, and I know Mary knows, but Monday is Eileen's birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Another Gemini.
Yes.
June is a nice month for a birthday.
Yeah.
Better than February, where you get snowed out. That's happened to me a lot.
Yeah.
Does anyone
Thank
know?
you again. I'm going to go join my cousin who just stepped in, and I'll be with you next week.
All right. See you, Jane.
Thank you, Eileen and Pat from Dory. I'd
Hi,
love
Dory.
to go to Peru, but I've never been there.
Thank you.
It was lovely.
Dory. And
See you
thank
in
you,
Santa
thank
Fe.
you, everyone. It's been wonderful
you.
visiting with you, and I've loved the chat time that we've been able to build tonight. So that was great. Mary, it's so good to see you in Texas.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Feliz cumpleaños. Bye-bye.
All right. We will see you next Friday. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you
Bye.
very much
Weekend.
for the time and work you put in. Thank you.
Yes.